that offer community perspectives on safety and community perspectives on justice are so important, because oftentimes I think what happens is that individuals in our society and individuals in our communities have a disconnect between what they perceive as punitive forms of justice and the effects that has and what is actually happening. You know, there's this idea that our communities can't be safe unless we have punishment, unless we have like this type of thing happening in our society. But time and time again, over the years, when you look at the impacts of punitive justice, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative. We see great rates of recidivism. We see people that are blocked out of career paths, that are blocked out of housing opportunities, and put into situations where sometimes there's no other option than to take like unsavory paths, you know, to take paths that are unsafe for them and unsafe for the communities. And so really these types of events are important both to highlight the disconnect between what we think is happening with punitive forms of policing and what actually is happening, but also to give an opportunity to highlight what community-centered justice can look like, and what transformative justice can look like, and what approaches to harm reduction can look like in our society, and the effects that those can have on safety in our communities.
Thank you so much for this answer. What significance does this event have in bringing people together to educate them on restructuring the power police are given in our society?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when we think about like the importance and like the impact that this type of event has, like one of the things that I'm most excited about is that, you know, there are already so many people, there are already so many organizations that are giving their time, they're giving their effort, and they're giving like, you know, their livelihood to seeing these alternatives to punitive policing take place. That could mean working for minimum wage. That could be mean working off the clock and volunteering their time. That could mean purchasing supplies, giving their homes, you know, to others without, you know, any recognition sometimes. Like, it's a very thankless work, it can be sometimes. And so I think what's so great about this event, and what's so great about having community members and organizations that have been doing this work for decades in many cases, especially here in Little Burgundy, and but I'll come back to that, is that we can celebrate those people. We can celebrate those individuals and those organizations that have been doing this work. And this year we're based in Little Burgundy, and I'm so excited that one of our first events is actually going to be on the history of community initiatives and policing and public safety in Little Burgundy since the 1980s onward to the present. And so we're really going to have an opportunity to see some of those alternative narratives that aren't always given the light of day in the common discourse.
Perfect. So the city aims to reach a workforce of 4,793 police officers by 2025. What do you think of Montreal pushing to have more police on our streets?
So when we talk about putting more police on the streets, there's a lot of nuances to that. One of the first things I'll bring up is that when we look at the municipal budget for this year in Montreal, we're looking at an enormous number. We're looking at over 20%, close to 20% of our municipal funds are going into policing-oriented initiatives. When we look at community-centered funding, and not all of this is going to organizations or individuals that are working on the ground, but when we look at community-centered initiatives, it's a lower number. It's closer to 4 to 6%. And when we see the effectiveness of these types of methods that I spoke about earlier with recidivism rates and with blocking people out of career opportunities and housing opportunities, we're causing more harm. And the more money we put into that and the more money we take away from our communities, the more harm we're actually causing to the most vulnerable populations. So, you know, I can't stress enough, you know, like any initiative that puts more money into policing or punitive-oriented justice, I should say, is money that's being taken away from our communities and harm that is being done to our most vulnerable populations.
Perfect. Last question. What can Montrealers do to question policing in our society?
So that's a difficult question. There's a couple things. I mean, one would be like show up for some of the events the coalition is hosting. I mean, oftentimes we'll go to the city council and like, you know, stage a series of questions there, for example. Or like for the more diligent, you know, letter writers, you know, you can write to your city council. Like these things do have an impact. Montreal has like metropolitan city status. They have a little bit more power than other municipalities do to enact like certain initiatives around these types of things. So you can write to your city councilors, you can get involved in community events, or like volunteer at organizations that are doing this type of work on the ground. Off the top of my head, those are some things to get involved. And, you know, like try to be educated about what's happening, you know, which is, there's so much propaganda out there. I recognize this can be a harder thing to do, but like be aware of alternative narratives.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you, Maude. I appreciate you being here.
Perfect.